Union Commerce, Industry and Textiles Minister Piyush Goyal on Friday unveiled a new foreign trade policy that moves away from providing incentives to exporters, but lowers a few costs for smaller firms and promises swifter clearances, along with a one-time amnesty scheme for export obligation defaults. The new policy kicks in from 2023 to 2024 and aims to almost triple India's goods and services exports to $2 trillion by 2030, from an estimated $760 billion in 2022 to 2023. India's exports were $435 billion in 2015 to 2016 when the previous policy was introduced, and have grown nearly 75% to an estimated $760 billion in 2022 to 2023. There are no major new schemes, barring a one-time amnesty under the existing Advance Authorization and Export Promotion Capital Goods (EPCG) schemes, which allow imports of capital goods subject to specified export obligations. The UK on Friday acceded to the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership (CPTPP). The British government said the deal would mean that more than 99% of British exports, including for key markets such as cheese, cars, chocolate, machinery, gin and whiskey, would have zero tariffs. It also claimed that the deal would add £1.8 billion $2.2 billion annually to the UK economy in the long run. The government said the deal was a gateway to the Indo-Pacific region, which would account for a majority, 54%, of global economic growth in the future. The UK is currently also negotiating a free trade deal with India. Downing Street highlighted some of the benefits of the CPTPP, such as a cut in whiskey and car tariffs for British goods going to Malaysia. Services, which are a key UK export, accounted for 43% of exports to CPTP countries last year. Output across India's 8 core sectors rose at a 3-month low pace of 6% in February, as growth eased from January's revised estimate of 8.9%, which was the highest uptick in 7 months. Fertilizer production continued to lead growth with a 22.2% surge, while coal, steel and electricity production eased from double-digit growth in January to rise by a 7% to 8.5% range during February. Cement production grew 7.3%, compared with January's 4.6% expansion. Crude oil output shrank 4.9%, the 9th successive contraction and the sharpest drop in as many months. Natural gas and refinery products growth moderated from about 5% in January to just over 3%. The overall index of core industries, which constitutes about 40% of the index of industrial production, IIP, dropped 7.8% sequentially in February, with all 8 sectors recording lower numbers. India's current account deficit, CAD, narrowed to $18.2 billion, 2.2% of GDP, in Q3 of FY23 from $30.9 billion, 3.7% of GDP, in Q2 of FY23 and $22.2 billion, 2.7%, in the year-earlier period, according to RBI balance of payments data. Services exports reported a growth of 24.5% year-on-year on the back of rising exports of software, business and travel services. Net services receipts increased both sequentially and year-on-year. Net outgo from the primary income account, mainly reflecting investment income payments, increased to $12.7 billion from $11.5 billion a year earlier. Private transfer receipts, mainly representing remittances by Indians employed overseas, amounted to $30.8 billion, an increase of 31.7% from the year earlier. In the financial account, Net FDI decreased to $2.1 billion from $4.6 billion a year earlier, the RBI said. Net foreign portfolio investment recorded inflows of $4.6 billion as against an outflow of $5.8 billion in Q3 of 2021 to 2022. The center's fiscal deficit touched 82.8% of the full-year target at the end of February, according to data from the Comptroller General of Accounts. In actual terms, the fiscal deficit or gap between the expenditure and revenue collection during April to February period stood at 14.53 lakh rupees crore. Fiscal deficit in the comparable period of 2021 to 2022 was 82.7% of that year's revised estimate in budget. The center has raised interest rates on most small savings schemes for the April to June quarter, barring the Public Provident Fund (PPF), whose returns have been static at 7.1% for the last 3 years. The United States Department of Commerce and its Indian counterpart have recently concluded a Memorandum of Understanding in March 2023 to ensure that subsidies by each country do not come in the way of India's semiconductor dreams. The Semiconductor Laboratory, SCL, was set up in Mohali in 1983 by the then central government, with the vision of creating an electronics ecosystem in an era when Keltron, Apron and Webel were fledgling entities in a pre-liberalized India aimed at consumer electronics. SCL Mohali can be viewed as a technology stack similar to others such as Aadhaar, Arogya Setu and the Unified Payments Interface, UPI, acting as a force multiplier effect, encouraging many integrated circuit design startups in India to consider designing for India. The institutional framework for such a shift in focus already exists, with the transfer of SCL back to the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, (MeitY), after a 15-year stint as a laboratory within the Department of Space, as part of the new semiconductor policy announcement in December 2021. An alternate approach could be to leverage human and capital assets at the SCL to build on what exists in a targeted manner to jumpstart the semiconductor mission by taking advantage of recent technological breakthroughs in a class of semiconductors that do not need advanced lithography equipment. An investment of $50 to $100 million may result in the development of Indian solutions for automotive electronics, EV traction inverters on board chargers, PV inverters, 5G infrapower amplifiers, railway electronics, traction inverters, creating the Indian equivalent of Bosch, Siemens, ABB, Mitsubishi Electric, Thales and ELTA. The upgrade has to be backed by subsidies aimed at fabless design houses with proven design, sales of $100 million per year, willing to fabricate at the SCL in the 180 nm plus node, and possibly transfer process intellectual patents if they have any. The recent efforts by the India Semiconductor Mission to open up subsidies to global small and medium-sized enterprises in the upstream supply chain are welcome because an existing facility like the SCL will benefit from this. A leading US official has said the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, is open to deepening ties with India.